Good morning, guys. We are here with a new unit. Good job on completing our essay. I haven't started grading them yet, but I'm really excited to start grading them. Your outlines were actually really good. So I'm so impressed that you were able to do that all on your own with hardly any help from me and from Mr. Longo. So great job. Also, can I point out my orchid is blooming? It's very exciting stuff over here, you know. This is what our lives have come to. We're very excited about our blooming plant. All right, so as you can see here, mini unit. We are talking about poetry. We talked about poetry a little bit in school, but this is going to be a new type of poetry that we're going to be looking at. All right, so our essential question: how do the author's choices in using poetic devices impact the meaning and tone of poetry? This is the question that's going to take us through our entire poetry unit. Now, the reason this is called a mini unit is it's pretty short. We're getting close to being done with school, and the last week of school is mostly going to be spent on fun stuff, which you'll hear more about soon. But yeah, so we're getting pretty close. So this is just gonna be a little mini unit about poetry before you head into 8th grade. All right, so determining tone in poetry. This is one poetic device we didn't talk about too much when we were in school. So the definition for tone is the feeling or attitude the author has toward a subject. Now, typically we can think of tone into 3 different categories. It can be a positive tone, a negative tone, or a neutral tone. So positive, these are going to be things like we can describe the tone as being hopeful or passionate, proud, loving, optimistic. Those are positive tones. Maybe you want to think about a neutral tone. This happens sometimes where it can be direct, non-judging, unconcerned, or observant. Sometimes poems write about like nature and they just observe what's going on in nature. They don't actually like comment on it or have a positive feeling or negative feeling towards it. And then a negative tone would be like annoyed, anxious, fearful, confused, or angry. So any of these tones are like something where you feel like this author is angry about whatever they're talking about. That means they have a negative tone. Now, at the bottom here, this is something super important. I want you to be aware of any tone shifts in a poem. So maybe it starts out being really negative towards something, it's angry about something, but then something changes their mind and they actually become like hopeful for the future. That would be a big tone shift. So you want to look out for those. Okay, we're going to practice this a little bit. So it says practicing tone. Here's a poem that I'm going to read to you, and we're going to answer these 3 questions. So it says, if someone does not want me, it is not the end of the world. But if I do not want me, the world is nothing but endings. So I want you to go ahead and write down these 3 questions, or you can just write down the answer to them on a separate piece of paper. And you're going to answer these 3 questions. Number 1, is it a positive or negative tone? So I just completely took out the option that it's neutral. So is it positive or negative? Is there a tone shift? And what words would you use to describe the tone? So I want you to go ahead and answer these 3 questions on your own paper, and then go ahead and come back to this video when you're done. So pause this, answer those 3 questions the best you can, and then come back. All right, hopefully you guys did that. And now let me show you what I came up with. Okay, so I think this is a positive tone at the beginning. At the beginning, I even give you a little quote here. It says, it is not the end of the world. So if someone does not want me, it's not the end of the world. They're like positive about this. Like it's not the end of the world if someone doesn't want me. But then it kind of turns negative. It says the world is nothing but endings. So if I do not want me, the world is nothing but endings. This is kind of a negative tone here. And then is there a tone shift? Yes. It says here this word but. It says, if someone does not want me, it is not the end of the world. But if I do not want me, the world is nothing but ending. So there's this tone from positive to negative. Okay. And then the third one, what words would you use to describe the tone? It's really like this hopeful tone at the beginning. Like, you know, I'm hopeful that even if somebody doesn't want me, it's not the end of the world. I'm okay with me, and that's what matters. But then at the end, it's almost like serious, where it says, if I do not want me, the world is nothing but endings. I wouldn't necessarily describe this as sad. They're not sad about it here, but they're saying like, they're saying this very seriously. If I do not want me, the world's nothing but endings. Okay. Now here's some figurative language that we've talked about before, but just a refresher. A simile is when you compare 2 things using like or as. So an example for this is maybe a line of the poem says, my pillow is as soft as a cloud. This is comparing the pillow to a cloud, and it's using this word as, so we know it's a simile, not a metaphor. The metaphor says the direct comparison of two things without using like or as. So this is when you compare two things directly. You don't have that like or as in there. An example of this would be, my best friend is a ray of light in my life. So my best friend is a ray of light in my life. They wouldn't say my best friend is like a light in my life. That would be a simile. Instead, they're just directly comparing the light of a ray of light to the best friend. And then an extended metaphor. This is the one that gets a little bit tricky and it's hard to exactly notice it sometimes. So an extended metaphor is a metaphor that is developed or referenced over several lines of a poem. So it is a metaphor, but it's extended metaphor because it's referenced throughout the whole poem or over a couple of lines. So an example of this would be like if you're writing a poem comparing sadness to a storm, and you do that throughout the whole poem. So maybe the whole poem is about a big storm that's going on inside this person, and they're really comparing the sadness that person's feeling to a storm using the whole poem to do it. So today's poem, you're going to focus on this extended metaphor. Extended metaphors are really a way that authors can express a theme of their poems in just this one small little way. So I want to show you a little bit about who Langston Hughes is. Langston Hughes is the person that wrote the poem we're going to be reading today. I just want to give you this little bit of background knowledge on him so that when you read the poem, you kind of understand where he's coming from.
Langston Hughes is considered a great author because he spoke to, for, and about Black people in America.
Poet, novelist, and playwright, Langston Hughes was the leading voice of the Harlem Renaissance.
America was changing during the time that Langston Hughes was so popular. Black consciousness was becoming more and more public, more prominent. I think that Langston Hughes was important because he was one of the early figures to show the dignity and the beauty of ordinary Black life.
He was one of the most visible of the younger Black poets, a new generation that described themselves as the new Negro. They covered new topics, took on new poetic forms, and sought a wider audience, and Langston Hughes was at the forefront of that.
James Mercer Langston Hughes was born in Joplin, Missouri on February 1st, 1902. He wrote a lot about being lonely when he was young, and I think that was a tremendous part of the product of moving around so much. After graduating high school, Hughes published his first and most famous poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers.
It is the first poem that celebrates Africa and dignifies the image of Africa in American literature.
The Negro Speaks of Rivers was published in a popular Black journal, and so he was really rather widely read from the beginning. His poetry and his prose actually had access to everyday people. While studying at Columbia University, Hughes discovered the Harlem art scene, spending hours in jazz and blues clubs, weaving the rhythms of music into his work.
Jazz and blues were great influences on Langston Hughes. He sought to capture the energy and vitality of the music in his poetry.
He was very familiar with the Harlem nightlife. He knew the musicians, and later in his life, he would even collaborate with some of the key figures at that time, such as Duke Ellington.
Hughes was a prolific writer and one of the first African-American authors who could support himself through his writing.
Langston Hughes wrote plays. He edited anthologies of poets of African descent across the diaspora. He wrote short stories. One of his most famous series of short stories centers around Jesse B. Simple. These are tales told by a resident of Harlem to an aspiring writer who's a stand-in for Langston Hughes.
He was one of the more widely published of the young poets of the period. He was also among the better connected. He really worked hard to promote the careers of other young writers in Harlem and also throughout the rest of his life. That's also one of his big legacies. Langston Hughes died of cancer on May 22nd, 1967. His Harlem residence was given landmark status, a fitting tribute for a legendary writer.
His influence, his ambition as a creative writer, his success, his accessibility. He wrote for the average person. He was not writing for college classrooms. He was not writing for the elite. All of those things, I think, require that we recognize and acknowledge him as a great American literary voice of the 20th century.
Okay, so that gave you a little bit of knowledge about Langston Hughes so that we can go ahead and enter into this text, kind of understanding where Langston Hughes is coming from. All right, so your annotation task. As you read, we want you to take notes on the metaphor and the message it reveals about dealing with challenges. So you're really trying to focus on where is the metaphor in this text, what does it reveal about dealing with challenges. If you notice, this annotation task actually gives you a little bit of a hint about what the poem's going to be about. Something to do with dealing with challenges. So I'm going to head over to Common Lit. All right, it says, Langston Hughes is an American poet, activist, novelist, and playwright. He is also considered one of the leaders of the Harlem Renaissance, which was the cultural, social, and artistic movement of Black artists that took place in Harlem between the end of World War I and the mid-1930s. Again, your skill focus or annotation task. In this lesson, you'll be practicing analyzing an author's use of figurative language. This means paying attention to similes and metaphors. As you read, take notes of the metaphor and the message it reveals about dealing with challenges. So I'm going to go ahead and start this, and we're looking for this metaphor and the message it reveals. So I'm going to annotate this as we go, and I'm just going to do a couple lines with you. Says, well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time I's been a-climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you set down on those steps, 'cause you finds it's kinder harder. I'm gonna stop there. Okay, so I went through a lot here, and there's so much and so little when you read poetry, so you really want to pay attention to every single line. So it says, well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Already I noticed that there is a metaphor here. He is comparing life to a crystal staircase. So when I think about crystal staircase, I think a crystal staircase is like, to me, signifies like clean, rich, like maybe a rich person would have this like big crystal staircase, like solid, I don't know, like it's just like a perfect way to walk, right? Crystal staircase, okay? So he says, life for me ain't been no crystal staircase. Oh no, did I just delete that? That's okay. So the main thing you want to focus here is that life is being compared to a crystal staircase and that a crystal staircase is really good. But he says, for me, life hasn't been a crystal staircase. Like, it's not been easy. It has not been clean. He says it's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. So he's comparing his life to a staircase that is not perfect. So his life, not a crystal staircase. I'm going to say all of these things like splinters, boards turned up, no carpet, bare. All of these words to me make me think that he has had a challenging life. So all of these are metaphors for all of his challenges that he's gone through. It says, but all the time I've been a-climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners. So he says, I've had this hard life. My life has not been a crystal staircase. But even though I've been going through all of these challenges, I've just been climbing on. I've been going up that staircase. I've been reaching the landings. I've been turning the corners in the staircase, even though all my life has been hard. So he said, he continues up the staircase of life. And then he's been reaching landings and turning corners. So the landings and the corners, these are metaphors for like his successes in life. Okay, I'm going to stop there so I let you guys do some of the poem by yourself, but I'm really showing you what the main metaphor is here. It's this staircase of life. He says, my life has not been perfect. It's been hard. I've gone through lots of challenges, but even through all those challenges, I just keep going on. I just keep going. I've been getting successes, and then you'll see what happens at the end of this, okay? So 2 more things, I think. First of all, your post-reading assessment questions, you guys, you have to do it this way or we cannot give you higher than like a 1 or a 2 on your Common Lit assessment. So you need to know, this is the assessment question for this article. What message or theme does this poem express about dealing with challenges? You're going to have to answer this question and you need to give us a claim. So answer the question in your own words. A second sentence that has evidence, so quote from the text that proves your claim. And then the third thing is you need to have reasoning. So you should have, this shows, this matters because. So what does this show you and what does this matter? Why does this matter? So you need to have all of these in your answer. That means it should be at least 3 to 4 sentences long. If it's not, we cannot give you more than a 1 or a 2. So if you don't have evidence, you will not get more than a 1 or a 2. You need to have all of this stuff. So those of you that have been emailing me and be like, I don't like my grade right now, I need you to make sure that you're doing this, and then you'll be super solid. Just make sure you do this and that you come to office hours because we'll show you exactly how to do this and make sure you get the right answer. Last thing, we have a discussion post on Google Classroom. So the discussion post is going to say, what is the meaning of the metaphor, life ain't no crystal staircase? Do you agree with the idea presented in this metaphor? Why or why not? So do you agree with the idea that life ain't no crystal staircase, or do you not agree with that? Here's a nice little staircase for you. This isn't actually a crystal staircase, but it looked like magical and nice. So go ahead and head over to Google Classroom. Make sure you do that, and then you should be good. Come to office hours today from 1 to 2. I will see you there. Bye, everyone.